All right, so this weekend I worked an event, I was help check the cars at a NPRC event, and I've seen so many people. I can't tell you how many people I've seen running these Qs8 connectors, and they were struggling to plug them in and unplug them, plug them in and unplug them. I was checking voltage, so when the car came to me, they would have to plug it in, unplug it, whatever the case may be. And there were just a lot of people having a hard time. Even some people were thinking about getting rid of them just because of that. Now I can tell you that these are very good connectors. You just have to know how to get them the way you want them, so that they plug and unplug good. And you want to make sure that they're not too loose, because you don't want to burn up any ESCs. If you have a bad connection here, you could definitely damage electronics. So you want to make sure that you get this right. But once you get it right, these connectors are probably one of the best one you could use. Alright, so now what you're gonna do is, I got some pliers, some needle nose pliers, and a little screwdriver that fits just inside the connector itself. So now what you want to do is, if your connector is too tight and you have problems plugging it in, mine are pretty good because I've already set them up, but what I do is when I unplug them, I grab both sides and I use my thumbs to pull them apart. That way you're not cutting yourself, you're not busting your knuckles, you're not struggling. And if you get them really tight, when you want to unplug them, it's easier to wiggle them back and forth while you're pulling on them, and you can get them off. If you get these to open up too much, I put it in there, I move it out a little bit, I move it out, I try to move each one of them out a little by little. And when you move each one out, if you get it too tight, it's very hard. You can't even get it plugged in, you can't get it unplugged. Now, if it's too tight, what you're going to do is you're going to come in here with a needle nose, and you're going to squeeze the opposite prongs little by little, little by little. Then you're going to test it. Now, my personal opinion on this, you want this to be as tight as you can possibly bear with it, because this flows a lot of amperage, and a loose connection is bad. It'll actually create more amperage. So you don't want it super loose, and you also want to practice or test side to side. If one of them's real loose and one of them's real tight, you're going to have a bad connection. You could possibly burn up your ESC. So what you want to do is make sure that they're both nice and tight, and you're able to plug and unplug them. I try to run them as tight as I possibly can without having to struggle to take them apart. But I've seen so many guys that were just struggling to put them together and take them apart, especially when your ESC and wires and your battery wires are very short to get the max out of your setup. So all you want to do is make sure that you have this and this nice and snug, nice and tight in here, so when you plug it in, you have no problems with it. If it's loose, you have issues where you could the ESC could start cutting out, the ESC could burn up, it's going to cost you money. So you want to be very careful when you're doing this, but this is a way to make them easier to deal with. Now, for me personally, these are some of the best connectors that I've ever used. I use them on, you see I got 4 batteries here. These are 6S batteries. Most of my toys have 12S. So I use them on everything. I use these batteries, 6S, on my Rally. Got some jets on the wall too. The boat has two 12S setups per side. So it's got a 20 horsepower 12S setup on each side. It's got dual drives, 2 motors. And now this Porsche, this is a FG Sportsline. This car has 12S. This is a 12S setup. That's a 400 amp controller. I run 2 of those batteries, 6S, 6S in series on 12S. I have this car with these connectors. I've seen 550 amp spike through these connectors with no problem. You just have to make sure it's a nice, tight, snug fit. You can't have them loose. If they're too tight, it's a good thing, but it's hard to unplug and plug in. If it's too loose, it's a bad thing, but then it's easier to deal with. So you have to balance, a fine balance, to make sure that you don't burn up any ESCs or motors or connectors or nothing. But I've already proven, I've seen in the data log, I get 550 amps on this car through those connectors. The boat has 300 amp ESCs on each side, so it's going to at least be pushing 300 amps or give or take around there. And then that car, I can't really tell you, I don't remember exactly how many amps I've seen through it, but I also run these batteries with these same connectors in two of my airplanes, a 6S airplane and a 12S airplane. And the other day on my 12S airplane, when I fired it up for the first time, I was about to test fly it. I had these connectors where they were easy to plug in and unplug, no problem. And I noticed when I'd go full power, the ESC would cut out. So I thought to myself, you know what, just to test something out, let me tighten up these. I spread them out, I made it tighter. It was a little harder to plug in, but it was still doable. And I'd plug and unplug it, no problem. And then what happened was, when I plugged it right in after I tightened them up, the ESC stopped cutting out. So that goes to tell you that when I soldered these on to the new ESC, I didn't have them tight enough. And when I didn't have them tight enough, even though it was still going on nice and snug, it wasn't a good enough connection for the amperage that that airplane was pulling. So I went back in, spread them apart, tightened them up some. It was a much more snug fit when you'd plug them in, and the airplane stopped cutting out. So anybody that's dealing with this connector and it's hard for them to mess with it, plug it in, plug it out, unplug it, I would say try to do what I'm teaching you here to help yourself out, because if you can get them right, these are some of the best connectors you can use. I love them.